Michelle Newman was elected to the State Board of Education in 2020, representing the 8th District in Eastern Ohio. She is one of the 7 members who filed the lawsuit.
For me, from day one, the reason that I joined this lawsuit is the same reason that I do a lot of what I do is for my daughter. I am first and foremost a mother, and I happen to be on the State Board of Education for the state of Ohio. I never would have run for the state board if I didn't have a kiddo that was in public schools. I got engaged because I looked at the way that the state board was set up. And at the time, back when I ran in 2020, there were very few people on the State Board of Education that actually had kids active in public education. And I thought that was a big gap, right? I thought that was a voice that needed to be at the table. And so I decided to run. I decided to throw my hat in the ring to do it, to make sure that parent voice was there. And so that is the same reason why I decided to join this lawsuit. With the changes that were suggested through the legislature starting earlier this year, alarm bells went up and said, these changes would fully remove parent voice and not allow them to be at the table when it comes to discussions on education policy. And I just dug deep and I said, you know what, this is not okay. This is an attack on democracy. This is a removal of my voice, of the voice of parents, and I couldn't stand for it. And so that is why I am here on this lawsuit.
I don't know if you can answer this question, but why did you choose to file that lawsuit on September 20th when this was in the budget that passed in July? Why did you wait?
I think it's a funny question and a funny discussion that's going on because, Karen, the inherent idea behind that, right, is almost like everybody has a bank of attorneys waiting to challenge the state at any given moment. I'm just a regular person. I don't know where to start, right? I mean, you don't wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to challenge an illegal action of the state, and you Google it and they tell you how to do that, right? And so it wasn't, I actually think we should be given a high five for getting it pulled off by the time that we did, to be fully honest with you, because we did this as citizens. We did this as people who were concerned about what was happening to education. There's not a pathway for that, you know, and I really think the inherent problem is when finding recourse against an illegal state action is something that's only afforded to people who have connections or who have massive resources. That is a problem within itself. And the fact that that's one of the arguments here that's the problem is exceptionally bothersome to me. But the fact is, we were just regular people trying to say, we're not okay with this. What do we do? And that took some time and some planning. And so that's why it took to September 20th to make that happen. And with that being said, it's not like we were quiet before. Several of us testified in front of the Senate House Committee. We talked with our senators and our representatives prior. We wrote letters. I wrote op-eds. We did press releases. We weren't sitting idly by watching this happen. We have been working our butts off for quite some time to try to figure out something to do to slow down this freight train.
Governor Mike DeWine and Lieutenant Governor John Houston, among others, have said that the state school board is political, it's dysfunctional, it's unaccountable. They cite as an example, it's gone more than 740 days without hiring a permanent superintendent. So why hasn't a permanent superintendent been hired?
Well, we actually did hire a superintendent. We did hire someone who at the time, and I mean, there was huge debate about that with our board about who we were going to hire and who we were going to offer the contract to. And I'm very big on traveling to my districts, and I've always been very open about this when I spoke. I feel that we picked the right person at the right time. There was an issue with timing and how that worked and how that person played into the process. But we did select a superintendent that ended up not working out, as we all know.
You're talking about Steve Dakin, right?
Yes, I am. And so within that time frame, though, how it all worked out is then you have the legislation that starts to pop up and bubble saying, hey, we're looking at legislation to potentially do away with the board. We're looking at legislation to move education. And we really, as a board, we're looking, is it a wise use of taxpayer resources to plow forward on the selection of a superintendent if there could potentially be a massive change? And so our meetings are fully public and transparent. And so people can go back and look on the Ohio channel. They can watch our meetings. all the discussions are there as to why we decided to wait. And in the meantime, we have had fabulous interim state superintendents. Dr. Stephanie Siddons was an absolute gift to the Department of Education. Work never stopped. One of the things I have seen when I have been at the state board, the staff at the Ohio Department of Education are some of the most intelligent, committed, hardworking professionals that I know in the state. Nothing ever came to a standstill. There were extensive discussions. There were strategic initiatives that were moving forward. We were getting constant reports. Future Forward Ohio launched and went forward. The rhetoric is saying that work stopped and that there was no leader. That is an absolute fallacy. We continue to work exceptionally hard and we continue to move forward. And so while some people may look at that as dysfunctional, it's messy. Democracy is messy. Education is messy. It goes down literally to the individual child level. That takes time. And so, yes, we all bring our different ideas. It takes a little bit of time, but it's not dysfunctional in a way that is problematic. It's dysfunctional as in the way that is what democracy is supposed to look like to make it work when all the stakeholders are at the table.
Since you've been on the board, there have been discussions over an anti-racism resolution on disparities between students of color and white students. That was passed, and then it was rescinded. 2 board members resigned. There was a resolution that went against a federal policy requiring K-12 schools to follow LGBTQ anti-discrimination policies in order to receive federal funding. Is the state school board too political?
You know, Karen, it's a great question. And so here's how I would reframe that and change it. The state school board is a place where all opinions can come to the table, right? Every single person at that table is going to bring in their own ideas. They're going to bring in their own frameworks. But with a nonpartisan seat, we have the freedom to come in and do the work in a way that frees us from potential ties of maybe party affiliation. And in fact, since I have been on the board in January of 2021 up until now, we have had over 719 written testimonies provided to the state board. And that's only the written, and not everybody gives the written testimony. We have a lot of individuals that show up and give live testimony without written. We give 5 minutes minimum to each person who comes and gives testimony. That's 60 hours of public testimony from people from all across the state of Ohio with a wide variety of beliefs. That's not even including questions and answers, right? Countless hours of being able to hear from people. That's not politicization. That is democracy in action. And so that is how I would defend that.
You've said in your lawsuit that a constitutional amendment approved in 1953 by 56% of voters created a state board that voters could hold accountable rather than leaving it all to the governor. But if people don't know who you are, which is another claim that Republicans have made, nobody knows who their state board of education member is, whereas people know who the governor is. They vote for him or her. They know that person's policies. That person often campaigns on improving education in Ohio. So how is you being there more accountability than having it in the hands of the governor, who more people know than know perhaps you?
Yeah, that's always a funny question to me as well too, because you go talk to people and you say, who's your representative in the House, who's your representative in the Senate, and I know those individuals think everybody knows who they are. They don't always, right? And so I mean, that's just a defunct claim on that. The fact is, we're out there doing the work. I mean, for me, again, I went into this as a mom to be an advocate for families, for my community, for teachers, for schools. I'm out there, I'm talking to my districts. And so it's like we are out there as a voice, or at least I know I am, and my role to be able to be that mouthpiece for my community. And the fact is, those who do reach out, they find me, they Google me, and so it's one of those things. It's just, I think it's a silly deflection off of what the real issues are that are here. It doesn't matter if someone can't pick me off the street or anything like that. It's the fact that I'm doing the work.
Those who support the transition to the Department of Education and Workforce with a director who be appointed by the governor and the powers over academic standards say the status quo has not worked. Lieutenant Governor John Husted said, quote, "This is the least accountable when everybody's in charge. Nobody's in charge." So how would keeping the status quo help. And especially when there are people who are pointing to Ohio's educational performance has been declining in recent years as more evidence that the status quo represented by the State Board of Education and the Department of Education is not working.
Mm-hmm. Well, Karen, I'm big on metaphors. And so here's kind of the way that I look at this. First off, I mean, we're still coming off of COVID, right? When you put changes in effect and you look at what kiddos and families have been through in the past few years, we've got a lot to catch up from. And that's catching up even from what what was happening in schools before. We've got some exciting work that is moving forward on that. And I'd like to see that work continue. The fact being, the State Board of Education cannot make legislation. We cannot decide where funds go. We have no powers of being able to push funds one way or another. And so for us, I look forward to what happens if we maintain the status quo, or for those who support the changeover. Here's kind of my question. That's like building a house and not following building code or zoning, right? The question isn't, are you going to make something pretty? Because if they do this and they're able to do it, it may look nice. The fact is you didn't follow code. And this is like, I'm not an attorney. This is why I have an amazing legal team that's working with myself and the other plaintiffs in this. But it's like, just because you want to do something doesn't mean you can go do it and not follow the letter of the law. And voters in 1953 said, we want this out of the governor's office. If you want to put it back in the governor's office, then ask voters if they want to do it.
The court order won by the board members was extended this week to October 20th.